The first one is, can we get copies of the presentation? Yes, we will put that out, as Dave Kohler mentioned, on the web page since we're recording this. The next question is, how does this compare with independent manufacturers' tools such as Schletter? I actually have never seen this tool before, and while the presentation was going on, I tried to log in and look at it. It looks, I wasn't able to get in, but from the outside, it looks like a very comparable tool, which we will look at and try to figure out if there's a tie of any sort there. Can the software show voltage of the power lines?
Can I jump in there, Randy?
Yeah, go ahead there.
One important differentiator between our tool and the Schletter's tool, although again our team is not familiar with the Schletter tool, is that our tool is not only free as in free beer, but it's free as in free speech, the open source that Dan has been discussing. So while Schletter's tools are doubtlessly fantastically made, I am certain, while being unfamiliar with it, you're free to use it, but not necessarily to distribute it to your friends, to change it as you see fit, to host it internally. There may end up being restrictions to even build a small citing enterprise based around it. These are all liberties that you do have with PVMapper as a free and open source application. Go ahead, Randy.
Thanks.
One other thing I might add about just Schletter's tool is that, well, two things. First, Schletter did help us on our beta testing of this software, and our tool is a little bit different in Schletter's tool in that we're really trying to make the processes shorter and faster and easier for developers, utilities, etc. Take their existing processes and make it more efficient and more effective by having all of the data sets in one spot, and really being able to quickly, at a glance, look at those different sites that they might be considering and be able to immediately, I guess, take some of those that they were considering out of the process. And Schletter's tool really looks more a little bit about the power potential, and same thing with PVSys. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But Scott, did you show about the, I'm sorry, were you on the next question, Randy, which was about the power lines?
Yeah, and go ahead and mention what that's all about there, Scott.
The voltage of power lines. Yes, the tool can show the voltage of power lines. So if I enable our layer here for power infrastructure, you'll see just as soon as that pops up for Tucson, the different sorts of layers color-coded. Of course, the rule of live demos is that occasionally layers never quite populate in the last second when you need them to. But long story short, yes, not only do we have existing PV values on the map color-coded by the line, basically the thicker and purpler they are, the higher voltages. Also, we show that here in the tool. So again, the nearest transmission line is listed with the kV value if it's known, or the nearest substation is listed with its kV value range if it's known. So we're sourcing off of OpenStreetMap's power infrastructure data here, so a number of the kV values are not known, but a substantial number of them are. We're quite thankful for. So this will give you all the information that we have available.
And one other thing, Scott, I would like to point out is that let's say that you are a developer who would be developing a plant that needs access to a line that is very high in capacity, or a large substation. You're certainly able to adjust that within the utility function editor. And Scott, if you could show that. And then also, on top of that, in addition to that, I should say, is if let's say that you do have access to Ventix data or some other data set that you purchase, proprietary data, you could use that instead.
Yeah, so if you have Ventix data, you can export it to KML and load it in just like we demonstrated on the park set of sites, and base on it rather than on OpenStreetMap's data.
We've got a couple questions from the same person here next. Is it possible to import layers? Yes. Common delimited files? No. It needs to be a GIS layer to be imported in as a KML. But that should allow you to bring attributes in that you want to look at. For a small megawatt project, is it important to locate near a substation or a transmission line? I would say yes, because it's more expensive to build out the further it is. The tool's advertised for utility scale. Is it good for smaller? Yes, indeed. We built it that way for because of the grant for utility scale, but it doesn't matter what size you do, as Scott demonstrated it in the park example.
Mm-hmm. Now, the only asterisk I would put on that is that a couple of the sources of data are more accurate when such as the soil data. Soil data is only sampled at certain intervals and only to a fine grain in limited locations, as we saw. Some sites don't have soil data. So that may be limited if you're doing a very small site. Your soil data may be inaccurate. And in the site detail report, which I've shown you before, and I can run again here, there are long descriptions of each tool and its data sources, and it will discuss in here any concerns that each tool's data source may have about the size of your site or the relative utility or any data areas that may be missing.
The next question, I think I understand what you're asking, Naveen. Have you looked into automation of site identification based on desirable scores? We basically went the opposite direction because the processing time to find those desirable locations could be very, very long. If that's not what you were after, go ahead and add an additional question in there. The next one, can you change thresholds associated with certain criteria? For example, a degree of slope? Absolutely. You can set that in the.
Mm-hmm. So as we mentioned, the slope tool here works on it displays the percentage of land in your site that is above some minimum slope threshold. So it looks like we've set our slope threshold as 2% here, and that's why site 2 is scored a little bit low. We could come in and change that back up to, I think, the default of 5%, and you'll see that now site 2 is much more suitable because 97% of it has less than 5% slope.
We have an interesting question from Martin. How would I use PVMapper if my main application that I use is PVSYST, which I think maybe Dan might be able to help with?
I think I can field that.
All right.
PVMapper the goal is to really address this site selection, site comparison area. So if you have 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 possible sites that you've narrowed it down to, and you'd like to narrow it down further, and you'd like to narrow it down further very rapidly, that's the area we've targeted PVMapper into. Tools like PVSYST are, my understanding, is that they're more attuned to individual site layout, single site design, and so our hope is that PVMapper can get you down to just 1 or 2 sites, and then you would do more detailed analysis on those, such as putting them into PVSYST or doing on-site visits, site studies, or integration studies with the local power distribution network, things of that nature. So our hope is that this fits into your normal workflow just before you would otherwise use PVSYST.
And you could, Scott, to piggyback on that, you can export once you've narrowed down your sites, let's say to 3 particular sites that you might be mainly interested by using PVMapper, then you would save those to a KML, and then you would import those KML files into PVSYST to look at the layout, to look at the power production, the power potential, that kind of thing.
One thing also to mention is we didn't cover the feature of saving your sites to KML. We also didn't cover the feature of exporting the scoreboard as you see it to a CSV file if you wanted to do further analysis on your own. We support both of those features.
Would you like to answer the architecture question, Scott or Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. A large extent of the heavy lifting is done on the front end in JavaScript. It's client side, which we decided was a pretty good design choice. That keeps a number of your business logic, your business values on your computer, not ever going to a server, which we appreciated. The remaining bits of logic right now are implemented in .NET. We chose that mostly as a vehicle of convenience. That could easily, and Dan and I have discussed porting that down to using a PHP backend. Right now, we also use a Mongo database just in case the tool wildly takes off and we need massive scalability. But that also can be quite easily replaced if you wanted to host PVMapper for yourself on an internal network with private data. Those components are pretty easy to swap out.
Yeah, I'll jump in here too. This is Dan. The question about the backends database and backend software requirements is something that we have been talking about. And in fact, I've actually got a little bit of work going on right now, updating and revising a branch of the PVMapper source code tree to not require ASP.NET and the Windows Server. So short end is that this is actually on our radar, that to even make a lighter weight installer for this, where you just simply download the PHP code and set up a database and put it on your own server. So since most of it's JavaScript, it seemed pretty reasonable to have it as loosely tied to specific server requirements as possible. That is a reason to join the CodePlex site and check the little box that says notify me when issues and discussion are posted.